This thrilling story begins in a historical century, where a vast kingdom was steadily expanding. The soldiers of this empire were extremely well trained. One of their leading knights was named Hotspur. He had undergone rigorous training himself and ensured his soldiers were the best. Because of this consistency and dedication, they had never lost a single battle. They had defeated every neighboring kingdom, and now their territory was expanding rapidly. Hotspur and his forces achieved yet another victory and returned straight to the empire. Hotspur and his men were sitting before the king, having a meal. During this, Hotspur requested some money from the king for his cousin, who was gravely ill. In fact, several of his soldiers were also in dire need of financial help. But upon hearing this, the king refused. He admitted that while the soldiers were doing a great job, he could not give them any money at this moment. This deeply angered Hotspur. They were risking their lives and getting nothing in return. Hotspur lashed out at the king and said things so offensive that the king was left in shock. Furious, Hotspur walked away. Now we are introduced to Prince Henry, the eldest son of the king. The king had two sons, Thomas, the younger, and Henry, the older. But Prince Henry had given up his royal life entirely. He had no interest in politics or royal affairs. He preferred living like a common man, enjoying the simplicity of a normal life. He was comfortable that way. Prince Henry had only two interests, women and drinking. That's what he enjoyed and wanted to continue doing. Henry lived with a man named John, who had once worked in the military but was discharged due to an injury. John constantly tried to make Henry understand how lucky he was to belong to a royal family, something John could only dream of. He had always wished to become a soldier in the royal guard but never got the chance. This shows a harsh truth: when someone has too much, they often fail to appreciate it. Only when it's gone forever do they realize its true value. But Henry wasn't someone who could be easily convinced. He lived life on his own terms. One day, while Henry was walking through the marketplace, a royal messenger approached him. The man told him that his father, the king, was very ill, and he should visit him. It would make the king very happy. Henry also wanted to see his father, but he didn't want anyone to think he cared about the royal family or was interested in reclaiming his royal ties. So, he refused and walked away. Later, when John found out about this, he scolded Henry and urged him to go visit his father before it was too late, lest he regret it for the rest of his life, a regret that would never fade. Henry finally understood and agreed. He went to the palace to meet the king. Everyone was present, and the king's health was in critical condition. The king and others knew that Henry would never become the next ruler, no matter what. So, the king announced that after his death, his youngest son, Thomas, would become the new king. This was shocking because Thomas was still very young, and giving him such responsibility was extremely risky. Henry, too, was surprised, not because he wanted the throne, but because he was worried about his younger brother's safety. After this, Henry returned home, but he couldn't stop thinking about Thomas. He was deeply concerned. The next day, Thomas began his royal training, learning combat and how to lead an army. But then, they were surprised to see Prince Henry also show up at the training ground. Thomas, by now, had become angry at his older brother due to everything that had happened. He walked up to his brother and said, "You will never get the throne." But Henry calmly replied that he hadn't come for the throne. He came only to ensure his brother's safety. Thomas replied, "I can protect myself." But Prince Henry didn't believe that. To prove his strength and gain respect, Henry challenged the strongest man in the army, Hotspur, to a one-on-one duel. Originally, Hotspur was supposed to fight Thomas, but now Henry stepped in instead. Hotspur saw this as the perfect opportunity to prove that he was the strongest. So he accepted the challenge. On one side stood Prince Henry, and on the other, Hotspur. Both wore their armor and began sword fighting. It looked like they were evenly matched. Sometimes Hotspur had the upper hand, and at other times Henry took control. All the soldiers stood by, watching the intense duel. But Prince Henry always stayed one step ahead. He outsmarted Hotspur, knocked him down, and eventually made him unconscious. Henry had won the fight. But instead of congratulating him, Thomas angrily said, "Don't interfere if you don't want the throne. Stay out of this. I can handle everything on my own." Henry felt deeply hurt because all he wanted was to protect his brother. But instead, he was being blamed. Nothing could have felt worse. It was now being decided that Thomas would soon lead the army and launch attacks on enemy forces. This made Henry very anxious. He doubted whether Thomas was truly capable of handling it. So, Henry returned to his normal life, far away from the palace. A few days later, a man named William from the royal court arrived. He asked Henry to return to the palace. At first, Henry refused. But then William delivered devastating news. "Your younger brother Thomas has died in battle. and the king is bedridden and could die at any moment. That meant Henry was now the last surviving heir, capable of leading the entire kingdom. Henry was shocked. He rushed to the palace immediately, and started blaming his sick father, saying that giving the throne to Thomas out of pride was a mistake. Thomas simply wasn't ready. Shortly after, due to his worsening health, the king passed away. Now, Henry had no choice but to take over the entire kingdom. But this was only the beginning of danger and destruction. The official rituals began to crown Henry as the new king. Royal servants were sent to the village where Henry used to live, to collect all of his belongings. Henry had bought that house himself with the little money he had left. His companion John, who was living there for free, was now kicked out. John was treated worse than a servant. The palace servants said, "You're lucky Prince Henry ever lived with you. But now you'll never see him again. He doesn't associate with people like you anymore." John felt deeply humiliated. It seemed that Prince Henry had completely forgotten him, after becoming king. And why wouldn't he? John had no status. He couldn't even become a royal soldier. Meanwhile, the ceremony at the palace was still ongoing. Soon, Prince Henry would be officially crowned king. Many kings from neighboring kingdoms had come to congratulate him. They brought him rare and special gifts. For example, one of his cousins gifted him a mystical bird that could move through time. But among the many impressive gifts, there was one strange and disgusting object, a filthy ball. No one knew who had sent it. Prince Henry ordered an investigation. Then his loyal soldier Gas revealed, "This came from the King of France, our enemy. It's an insult." In those times, gifting something dirty or foul was a clear way to dishonor someone publicly. Gas was trying to make Prince Henry understand that they should take control of more French territories through military action. But for some reason, Henry wasn't very interested in war. His first priority was to improve the economic condition of his own kingdom. He believed that all the territory they had already conquered through previous battles was more than enough for their people. Rather than expanding aggressively, Henry wanted to move forward with strategic thinking and focus on strengthening the kingdom from within. Prince Henry believed that every citizen of the empire should be able to access resources properly, and their standard of living should continue to improve. His father, the former king, never cared about such things. He had only focused on territorial expansion. As the coronation ceremony ended, the other visiting kings began returning to their own kingdoms. One of them was Henry's cousin Philippia, who now began advising Henry not to ignore France. She warned him that there were certain French kingdoms that were openly against him. If given the chance, they would not hesitate to attack. So, whether he liked it or not, Henry had to take this matter seriously. After becoming king, Henry was introduced to a historian who began telling him the entire history of the kingdom. This was essential so the new king would be well informed about his empire. But in reality, Henry was quickly bored of these lessons. He stopped them midway, saying, "All of this belongs to the past. Now, we must stop dwelling on history and start focusing on the future." With that, Prince Henry walked away and began planning something in secret. Back in his room, Gas was already waiting. He kept insisting that if they didn't take action against France now, they would pay a heavy price later. Then, Gas revealed a shocking truth. "Your younger brother Thomas was killed during a battle that involved fighting against French territories." This revelation shook Henry deeply. He had no idea his brother had died fighting the French. Meanwhile, on the other side of the story, we see John, Henry's former companion, who had now become completely alone. Since Henry left, his expenses had skyrocketed, and he no longer had a place to live. He had to pay for even basic necessities. When Henry used to live with him, John never had to worry about such things. But now, he had to become independent. Even though John used to speak highly of Henry to others, after this incident, bitterness filled his heart. He began to feel like he was turning into Henry's enemy. Back at the palace, Henry went to interrogate a prisoner. The prisoner revealed that he was an assassin, sent by the King of France to kill Henry. Henry was completely shocked by this. He only wanted to rule in a peaceful and just way, but these people were still trying to kill him. Angered, Prince Henry ordered a letter to be sent to the King of France. Sending assassins is a coward's move. If you truly want to fight, then my army is ready. Let's go to war and see who among us is truly stronger. Within Henry's empire, there were two senior advisors. When they learned that the prince was ready for war, they panicked. They didn't trust Henry at all. Fearing for their lives, they secretly decided to side with the French king, hoping for safety and a high-ranking post. But they had no idea that Gas had overheard everything. Gas immediately went to Prince Henry and told him everything. He also encouraged him. "We have to move forward no matter what. We must eliminate all our enemies. There are French kingdoms capable of destroying us in one blow. That's why we need to act fast, unite all neighboring kingdoms and prepare for a massive war. This could be our final war, and after it, peace might finally return. Henry thought about it deeply and finally agreed. But before taking the next step, he punished the two traitorous advisors. The two advisors were ordered to be executed. Obviously, because while living in Henry's kingdom, they were secretly planning to flee to France. Both were publicly executed in front of everyone. This incident made Henry realize that he couldn't trust anyone blindly. He needed someone loyal, someone he could trust with his life. So, Henry went straight to meet his old friend John. But John was still extremely angry with him. He felt used, as if he meant nothing. Back then, when Henry needed a friend, he stayed with John. But as soon as he became king, he abandoned him. That's what hurt John the most. Henry understood his pain and sincerely apologized. He explained that he had just been overwhelmed with responsibilities, but promised that from now on, he would never leave John behind again. In fact, Henry wanted John to become his chief advisor, because John had past experience working in military affairs. John agreed, but only on one condition. He wanted to be paid well so he could improve his lifestyle. Henry accepted this and immediately sent some soldiers to spy on a French territory, with orders to attack if necessary. The soldiers began preparing, showing off their survival skills as they advanced. Eventually, they reached the targeted location, a place with weak defenses. They had chosen to strike the most vulnerable area first. Once the target was locked in, the attacks began, one after another. That small French kingdom was not prepared at all for an ambush. The entire palace was attacked, and many lives were lost. Henry's war advisors insisted they shouldn't stop the attack. But Henry only authorized limited strikes, ensuring that innocent people weren't harmed unnecessarily. He made it clear that while they had to capture French territories, they must also be mindful of civilians. Gapspor, one of his top advisors, added, "Once we gain control over their land, we can give their people a new place to live. But we must not get comfortable now. The real enemy hasn't even shown up yet. These are just small kingdoms. The real battle is still ahead." Henry's army kept moving forward, and eventually, the king of the small French kingdom surrendered. He came before Prince Henry and said, "You may take our land. But please, make sure the women and children of our kingdom get proper resources and protection." Prince Henry understood. He gave the former king his assurance. But the conquest wouldn't stop there. Henry's army would continue to capture one small kingdom after another, until all of France was under their control. Henry kept moving forward with the advice of his team and gas. Then suddenly, one night, the most powerful king of France, King Louis, arrived to meet Prince Henry. When Henry reached the meeting point, Louis made a bold statement. "Surrender now. If you do, I will not order my army to attack you." But Henry didn't flinch. He ignored the threat completely and walked away. This made one thing clear. Prince Henry was not afraid of Louis's warnings. He was ready to give a fierce response. As soon as he walked out, Henry told his advisor John, "We must prepare for an all-out war. Redirect all our forces. We're no longer attacking small kingdoms. We'll go straight to the main French territory. This will be the final battle. A decisive war to determine who will rule the land." Henry's soldiers were now traveling with their families, so they paused briefly to rest. Some soldiers went into the forest to look for food with their children. But then something shocking happened. Louis had secretly sent his men to that location. They brutally slaughtered the soldiers and left their bodies behind. When Henry and his people found out, everyone was filled with fear. Henry was furious. He immediately ordered John, "Execute all the remaining French prisoners we've captured. Cut them down and throw them away." Obviously, John was not going to agree to this, and he also knew that Henry didn't truly want this either. But Henry was completely consumed by anger and the desire for revenge. At such a time, they needed to act calmly. When Henry reached the top of a mountain with his army, he saw the full extent of Louis's forces, numbering in the thousands. It was clear that in such a scenario, their soldiers stood little chance of winning. Prince Henry was deeply troubled and sought advice. Many suggested they should retreat. But John, who seemed confident, revealed that he had a plan. Based on the weather information he had gathered, it was likely to rain that night. If it did, the battlefield would be completely filled with mud. And as they knew, the French soldiers had extremely heavy armor and solid shields. Obviously, if those soldiers entered a muddy battlefield, they would get stuck, and it would be difficult for them to move. This weakness could be used to their advantage. John advised Henry to first send a small portion of the army to the front. Once the French troops fell into the trap, then the full army could launch the real attack. Henry seriously considered it and realized the plan could work. His soldiers were experienced in archery, so they could also strike from a safe distance. He fully agreed to John's strategy, even though several other advisors considered it foolish. But Henry chose to trust John. As night fell, just as John had predicted, rain began to pour. They waited through the night and prepared to strike at dawn. When morning came, Prince Henry's army stood ready for battle. Henry went to speak with Louis one last time, offering a one-on-one fight, just like the one he had once fought with Hotspur. But after much thought, Louis rejected the offer, likely fearing defeat. Without any other choice, Henry returned to his troops and motivated them for the upcoming war. He made it clear that they had to drive back the enemy no matter what. As planned, a small group of soldiers advanced first, and seeing them, Louis sent even more of his own men forward. The French soldiers were heavily armored, but little did they know that their own armor would become their downfall. As soon as Louis's soldiers stepped onto the battlefield, they began sinking in the mud. The terrain was so slippery that they kept falling. Prince Henry's lighter armored soldiers took advantage of this, attacking swiftly and effectively. They moved quickly across the mud and began killing Louis's forces in large numbers. So far, everything was going exactly according to John's plan. Henry's army began completely dominating the battlefield. The French forces started falling apart under the relentless assault. Nearly 80% of Louis's army had been wiped out, and even Louis himself seemed to realize he was losing. Henry's troops kept following the plan, launching arrows from a distance, picking off enemies one by one. Eventually, when Louis saw his defeat coming, he stepped forward and challenged Henry to a one-on-one duel. But this time, Henry refused. Louis, dressed in heavy armor, could barely stand. He kept slipping in the mud and was unable to stay upright. Seeing this, Prince Henry ordered his soldiers, "Finish him off, together." Several soldiers rushed in and killed King Louis. Prince Henry's army had won the war. Just as he was about to celebrate, he discovered something heartbreaking. His friend John had been killed. Henry was devastated. The army began returning to the kingdom, victorious. Even the last remaining French king came forward and surrendered. He told Henry, "I will give you everything. But I have one condition." The king wanted Henry to marry his daughter Catherine, so that their two royal families would be united, and lasting peace could be maintained. Henry was suspicious. After all, the same king who had pushed for war all along was now suddenly talking about peace? But still, Henry liked the proposal and accepted it. He began the journey back to his kingdom, now accompanied by Catherine. Catherine was ready to spend her life with Henry, but along the way, she asked him a serious question. "What was your real reason for attacking us? My father never sent any assassins to kill you. Nor did he send that disgusting ball. All we ever wanted was peace, nothing else." Hearing this, Henry was shocked and confused. He had been told that it was the French king who sent the assassin and that insulting gift. But now Catherine was saying otherwise. Henry immediately went to Gas, his advisor, and demanded the truth. In the end, Gas finally confessed. "Yes, it was all my plan. I desperately wanted our kingdom to expand. And I wanted to secure a powerful position for myself. So I deliberately made the King of France look like the villain, to provoke a war between the two kingdoms." Now that the war was over, and everything was settling down, Henry was filled with rage. Without saying another word, he grabbed a dagger and killed Gas on the spot. After that, Henry returned to Catherine, apologized sincerely for everything he had done, and promised her that from now on, he would always work to maintain peace and harmony between the kingdoms. Catherine forgave him and accepted Henry as her husband. And that's where our story comes to an end.